so clearly. It was, let me think, around 3 in the afternoon. Yes, it must have been. I was watching Farewell Dance at the time. I heard this loud noise from my neighbor's room. A fire alarm started going off a little after that. Oh, I think it was about 10 minutes. I looked out of the window and saw smoke coming from next door. I ran over from my neighbor's door, but nobody answered when I pounded on it. I had to see if there was anyone in there, so I pulled on the door. It was chained from the inside. And no one answered when I pounded on it. Yes, the fire truck came soon after that. They cut the chain on the door. Oh, it seemed my neighbor lived alone. Oh, but there was an electrician that came out around noon. He was talking outside, from the front door.
A murder? Yes, that's fine. He said his error was broken and needed to be fixed. That was around noon, I think. I got a car earlier in the day. He said he needed it fixed that day, so I went straight there and finished the job I was doing then. Yeah, it was really quick. All I needed to do was swap out a cable. I think it was only there for about an hour. Yes, I fixed his heater. Well, the day he looked, I wouldn't be surprised if he committed suicide. Around 3 p.m. I would have a clue. I was already fixing a washing machine at my next appointment house by then.
Let's get this over with. Dennis Taylor? Wow, that name brings back bad memories. We broke up years ago. At first I thought he was an interesting guy, pretty cool and all. But he never had a job, and he always just wandered through life. But he always had money. I'm sure he didn't come by it honestly. Are you this slow? Drugs. He was a drug dealer. He worked for some fish named Theodore. I guess Dennis got totally used by him. What an idiot. And way too dangerous for me. Who knows? I'd assume he's still out there drug dealing at this very minute. What? He died? When?
Want to talk about Dennis? You're better off asking his girlfriend. Her name's Stella. She's down at the club on Roulette Street. She can probably tell you more than I can. That guy, huh? Now, he's a friend of mine, you know. I don't hate him. We've been out drinking together that night before. He did seem pretty flush recently, if you know what I mean. He called me up out of the blue and... Hey, what's up? Cool.
We're in the middle of an interview. We're gonna have to ask you to leave.
No.
Please, if you're interviewing,
No.
you're interfering with a federal investigation. We're gonna have to arrest you.
I'm not gonna leave.
Security.
I don't care what they say. I'm not leaving. This is my friend. I'm not leaving.
Excuse me, sir. You don't have to leave.
Mm.
Come on, let's go.
You
Let's
guys
go.
are so mean.
Let's go.
Anyway, you were saying.
He seemed pretty flush recently, if you know what I mean. He called me up out of the blue and said he'd pick up the tab that night. That wasn't really important. That's just how he normally brags. He was all proud of this red Portland Jacks t-shirt he was wearing that night. It's a red one in a limited edition or something. They're pretty rare of his, I don't know. His job, huh? Well, he worked at a crappy bar in the back of an alley. You probably can't even call it a bar either. I don't know how he made his cash. That's why I said he should be talking to his girlfriend. Hey, do you guys really think he offed himself? That's just stupid. He's one of the sharpest souls I've always looking out for himself. He always thought good of himself. He had no money. He had no money. You should go out and, if you had no money, he said that you should go out and steal it. If you guys really think he killed himself, I don't think he did.
The customer? Well, the way he looked, I wouldn't be surprised if he committed suicide. He fixed the air. We should focus on that. There's nothing odd about having a repairman come to work on the ventilation system. But at the very least, Dennis was still alive when the electrician came.
Alright, let's piece this together step by step. The deceased, Dennis Taylor, was found dead in his apartment. His body was discovered because of the life.
Of a fire, yes, but by the time firefighters arrived on the scene, the fire had already gone out. His corpse was found on the bed.
That's right. FBI and police initially ruled the case as a suicide. The reason for that was the knife and the slashed wrist. The other reason was the door was locked.
Indeed. The slashed wrist was the chain door point towards suicide. It would seem that he was so desperate for death that he would both slit his wrist and set his room on fire. That isn't a surprising conclusion.
Well, the knife blade does match the shape of the wound in the wrist. The blood on the blade matches his DNA. Lastly, the deceased prints were found on the handle of the knife.
Those were all true, but there was something odd about that wound on his wrist. First, no pain reaction wounds. Another point is the knife was in his right hand. His finger was fractured. Would he have been able to use a knife with a wounded hand?
It's very unlikely. But that's the only thing that raises the doubt. If he died, or did die of the knife wound, he would have bled to death. However, investigating the corpse points to a different cause of death. This is the hemorrhaging in his eyes.
This is where the deceased corpse was. If this blood stain is his blood, then he was lying on his back. Yes, the injury was on his left wrist from the position of the blood stain. It would appear he was lying face up on the bed. There was only the one blood stain, so he didn't move around much after his wrist was slit. If this truly is a suicide, that would mean that he bled to death here. However, the amount of hemorrhaging here seems too small for a man to completely bleed out. There's only one wound on the wrist, a single slash deep enough to reach the artery. No matter who it is, pain is an immediate response to a cut. No one should be able to make a single cut this clean and deep without flinching. I cannot say this is proof of a homicide, but I can't ignore this incongruity. Is this a bruise? It's oddly shaped, though. There's something odd about the eyeballs here. There appears to be spots of hemorrhaging in the eyeballs. This isn't a common condition. Perhaps I should ask Pipsqueak about it.
Dr. Kimishima, the results of the examination of the knife have come in. The knife itself is a cheap common brand sold all over the country. It'll be difficult to locate where the knife came from. The blood left on the blade matches the deceased's. Only his fingerprints were found on the handle as well.
I see. At least one thing is clear now. This knife is believed to have been used to slit the victim's wrist. Even then, we can't prove that unless we compose it to the wound, or compare it to the wound. The shape of the knife blade corresponds with the wound found on the wrist. This shows that the knife was used on his wrist. This appears to be an open and shut case. Then again, this all seems a little too inconvenient for me. A little too convenient for me.
There's no mistake. His finger is fractured. Can you send me the details? We'll get an X-ray performed as soon as possible. Oh, and I have one more piece of good news, Dr. Kimishima. I received a recording from HQ of a witness's account. Hemorrhaging in the eyes, you say? It's a condition called petechia. It is caused by increased blood pressure and spasms in the blood vessels. It's commonly found as a sign of death by
Asphyxiation.
asphyxiation.
Wait a second. That doesn't seem right. If I recall correctly, the cause of death was thought to be hemorrhaging from a slashed wrist. If the cause of death is asphyxiation, it's possible that we are dealing with a homicide. Let's put together the truth of what happened here. The victim in this case is 30-year-old Dennis Taylor. As there is no motive for murder, it's a suspected suicide. However, the victim had a hidden other side, and while he did work at the bar, he also dealt drugs. This case is related to the victim's drug activities because the drugs hidden behind the shelf are missing. The killer went into Taylor's room to kill him for his drugs. The real cause of the victim's death can tell us that, for the wound on the wrist was not the true cause. The killer disguised the murder as a suicide. The appearance of suicide covered up the real cause. The next topic is the secret hidden in the room itself. The murderer used a trick to create a locked room mystery. It was made to seem as if the victim was the only one there, and the killer thought this would clear his trail. And yet the culprit had one more way to hide from suspicion. That was to hide when the murder itself took place, which happened 3 hours prior to the fire's start. It's natural to assume that if the room was locked, then the crime and the fire would be at the same time. The plan was perfect. No fingerprints were left in the room. However, there was one thing the killer hadn't counted on, for there was one task he needed to remove his gloves to do. He probably couldn't button the clothes with his gloves on, no matter how small the buttons. There were still prints. Even a fragment of a fingerprint can be used to identify him. The victim must have been surprised. After all, he thought the killer was a customer. This is what he said at the very end.
On the day of the incident, the electrician had been asked to repair the deceased's air. The last time the deceased was seen alive was between noon and 1 p.m. At that time, he seemed depressed. This comes from the electrician's testimony. The last time we believe the deceased could have been alive is around 3 p.m. The neighbor reports hearing a sound from the room at the time. Within an hour after that, a fire started in his room, and the deceased was later discovered dead. That's all we know at this point. Hey, Pipsqueak, I want to go through the information that we've gathered so far.
He's resisting!
Stop! You! No!
Stop, police! You're under arrest for murder.
Oh, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say or do will be
To any sort of law, you have a right to an attorney if you can't afford one with you.
were found on
Now it's recording. She wasn't recording the whole time.